Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a film I grew up with along with many other 90s children. It's one of the first mainstream films for some viewers that combined animation and live action that leans towards a more mature theme while also appealing to children, making it a perfect family film, at least for that generation. But it has an interesting production record, and there is a certain truth about the history of the film that would likely surprise some of us longtime fans. Did you ever realize it was based on a novel? Disclaimer: I do not own the rights of any of the videos, images, or sounds other than my own voice that will be portrayed in this video. Everything you will see is for documentary purposes only, and is protected under the Fair Use Act of 1976. Who Censored Roger Rabbit was released in 1981, written by Gary Wolfe. Disney purchased the rights to the story that same year, which is interesting by itself, because normally something this fresh doesn't get picked up so quickly. Millions of books sit on the shelves, hundreds of thousands are published every year, and there are plenty that get the opportunity to be created into hit TV shows and movies. But they usually take some time to build an audience and gain some sort of rapport to constitute getting a shot at an adaptation. The novel was released June of that year, and within the next few months, it garnered enough attention that Disney wanted it. Now, book-to-film adaptation is not something new, and it isn't something that will go away anytime soon. A study done by Forbes in 2018 derived that 52% of the top-grossing films over a 10-year period were films based on novels. Now that's just in the UK. When you take gross sales worldwide, it becomes 65%. One might draw the conclusion that the film industry relies on books more than the publishing industry. But this is just a happy dance they have done for over a century at this point, and authors will always have that small chance of getting their hard work recognized to join this fortunate group of writers. Take Gary Wolfe, for example. There is only the year mentioned as to when Disney purchased Who Censored Roger Rabbit, being 1981, so sometime within 6 months or less, he got what was his fourth novel by this time in his career bought out by one of the biggest companies in the world. This was also the year Disney released The Fox and the Hound, which is the last film to feature the Buena Vista logo in the credits. This was the year they started Disney on Ice. And this was the year that Walt Disney World Resort would celebrate its 10-year anniversary. All that going on, and Gary Wolfe gets the phone call saying they want his book about a toon rabbit who hires a private detective to help him figure out why his owners want to sell him. Wait, that's not the plot of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It may or may not be a surprise to know that this is another case of Disney taking the rights over someone's work and doing whatever they wanted with it. The plot of the novel is only correlated to the film by the characters: Eddie Valiant, Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit, and a few others, but that's about it. The film is a complete departure from the source material it derives from. Even the description on how Roger Rabbit looks is more Disneyified, showing the titular character as being white-furred with big yellow-gloved hands, and portraying him as shorter than the secondary role of Eddie Valiant, portrayed by the late Bob Hoskins. Now, Bob Hoskins was 5'4". We can determine that Roger Rabbit isn't much taller even if you include his ears. In the novel, Roger Rabbit is 6 feet tall with brown fur and a really bad alcoholic. One might say the reason Roger Rabbit can't handle his liquor in the film is a little bit of an Easter egg that correlates to the novel itself. They wanted to include this little detail while also still allowing a cartoon character to retain some kind of innocence. The character of Eddie Valiant was also modified, as the novel portrays him as being more tall and slender, but also an alcoholic. The main difference in the alcoholism is there is no backstory of a brother who was killed by a toon. That is strictly for the film. In the novel, he's just an alcoholic. And just to be clear, when I say toon, that is what the film refers to when it speaks about cartoon characters that exist in the world. One of the monumental world-building devices the film uses is how effortlessly it depicts cartoon characters within our world. The editing capabilities it took to show live-action interactions with cartoon characters this good in the late 80s is amazing. The world shows us just the way things are, and cartoon characters are treated the same way as people would be treated. And forgive me for repeating myself, but this is just another one of those reasons why this is a perfect family movie. But even with the PG rating, it did still have certain undertones that felt more adult-orientated, especially for Disney.
Oh! Okay, I'm going.
The ladies mean, huh?
My problem is I got a 50-year-old lust and a 3-year-old dinky.
Yeah, must be tough.
This is why most might not have realized Disney owned the film at the time, since it was distributed by Touchstone Pictures, which Disney owns as a way to make films outside of their family-friendly persona that they need to maintain. This is why a character like Jessica Rabbit is able to exist. But despite what anyone has to say about the film version, the Jessica Rabbit in the novel is definitely not family-friendly. Depicted as a nightclub singer showgirl type in the film, Jessica Rabbit in the novel is a model for what's called a Tijuana Bible. For those born after 1990, this is a pocket-sized adult comic book that they made in the 50s and 60s. She's also depicted as being a sort of gold digger, sort of using Roger as a stepping stone to better her career, where the film portrays their love for each other as being more genuine. Oh, and the characters in the novels aren't cartoons on TV or in movies. They are comic strip characters, toons that are photographed for parts in comic books and newspapers. As the film has cameos from characters such as Betty Boop, Daffy Duck, Donald Duck, and Dumbo, the novel also depicts cameos from characters such as Snoopy, Hagar the Horrible, Beetle Bailey, and Dick Tracy. Despite using certain characters such as Baby Herman, the film also leaves out many characters that are part of the main story. Characters such as Carol Masters, Roger's personal photographer. In the novel, toons are photographed for publication, and they are teamed with photographers who get this done for them. Being that Roger is an animation in the film, and the film is not based on comics, there is no need for a photographer. Was it a huge mishap to leave out such a character? Well, it's all about the major differences in the story and the even bigger changes that Disney made. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is about Roger, a famous cartoon actor who seems to be slipping in his performances. The owner of the production company that Roger works for, RK Maroon, hires private detective Eddie Valiant to spy on Roger's wife, Jessica, because Maroon thinks that Jessica is having an affair with the Toontown owner, Marvin Acme. Toontown is a large, living cartoon city where the Toons live. Eddie spies on Jessica, where he discovers her and Acme playing patty cake, which is something that represents a violation to her marriage to Roger. Eddie reveals the evidence to Roger, to which he breaks down in disbelief, but he rebukes the notion and swears to win back his love. Soon after, Acme is murdered and Roger is the prime suspect. Thinking his part of the job is done, Eddie attempts to move on, but he's confronted by Roger, who seeks his help to clear his name. The murder of the Toontown owner also leads to the involvement of Judge Doom, a human who resides as the law within Toontown, who is now looking for Roger to execute him for his crime. Judge Doom is strictly a character created for the film and does not appear in the novel. Through the process of solving the murder, Eddie discovers that Acme's will left the ownership of Toontown to the Toons at the time of his death, which adds to the possible motive for why someone would want Acme dead. And he further begins to believe that Roger is innocent. We also have to note that Eddie hates Toons because his brother was killed by a Toon 5 years prior. Before that, Eddie and his brother loved working with the Toons, so this case essentially brings back all of those years of experience working with Toons as he begins to uncover more about what actually happened. He finds out that a buyer company, Cloverleaf, attempted to bid Acme out of his company and the ownership of Toontown, along with R.K. Maroon and his company, which Maroon had already sold to Cloverleaf. Maroon is then assassinated, Eddie and Jessica are captured by Judge Doom, and it is revealed that Doom owns Cloverleaf, and he wants to take over Toontown so he can erase it with a substance called Dip, all so he can build a freeway. In the struggle to stop Doom, it is then revealed that Doom was a Toon all along, and he confesses to be the Toon that murdered Eddie's brother. Eddie kills Doom by spraying him with Dip. They then find Acme's will, and Roger reads it aloud, revealing that, indeed, Acme had given ownership of Toontown back to the Toons if he was to die, and the film ends with the Toons celebrating having their own freedom. So now, that's the movie. What about the book? Who Censored Roger Rabbit sees Roger hire Eddie Valiant to spy on his bosses, Rocco and Dominic DeGreasy. They are the owners of the cartoon syndicate, and they employ all of the Toons. Roger fears they will back down from a deal they made him to give him his own comic strip and possibly sell him to someone else. Eddie discovers there is no buyer for Roger, but they wouldn't give Roger a shot at his own comic because they felt he wasn't talented enough. Then Roger is murdered, and the crime scene indicates that someone wanted to silence him. Eddie takes on the case then to solve his murder, and it points him towards various characters, including his estranged wife, Jessica Rabbit, who left him for Rocco DeGreasy. Then there's also his co-star, Baby Herman, who also appears in the movie, and the photographer, Carol Masters, we mentioned earlier. Eddie is then confronted by a doppelganger of Roger, who is also trying to solve the case. Then Rocco DeGreasy is murdered, and witnesses say it was Roger, but Roger is supposed to be dead, so Eddie thinks it might be the doppelganger. Then Eddie is told to find a kettle that turns out to be a magic lamp that holds a genie, who claims to grant wishes that come with a catch. The genie explains that Roger used him to wish for success, not realizing the complications of his request. The genie confesses to being the one that killed Roger, but the genie also killed Dominic DeGreasy. So Eddie takes the genie and threatens him with salt water, which is apparently the genie's weakness in this world. Eddie forces the genie to grant his wish for proof that Roger is innocent. The genie conjures a suicide note from Dominic confessing to the murder of Roger and his brother Rocco. Eddie then kills the genie with the salt water. Before Eddie can use the note, it is revealed that the doppelganger was the real Roger Rabbit the whole time. And it was him that actually did kill Rocco DeGreasy, because he was jealous that Jessica left him for Rocco. Roger's plan was to plant the murder weapon in Eddie's office to frame him for Rocco's murder, but the genie had stopped him. Once Roger discovered that Eddie was trying to help him, he decided against his plan and instead chose to drift off into nothingness. Not only is the novel way more darker than the film, it's really far out there in terms of a generally structured story. But that was merely the cliff notes, and it's actually such an interesting story that when most learn about it, they sort of want to see this version. But it's much too dark for the likes of Disney. You can see the great liberties that were taken, and rightfully so. The film Disney made is a classic, and if it was anything like its actual source material, there is no telling if it would have been as successful. Now, there are a few similarities you can point out. Despite obvious characters that were used, there's this minor detail you can pinpoint where the doppelganger idea gets a slight cameo. In the scene of Roger and Eddie meeting in his office, you can see Roger change shape slightly, which I feel sort of resembles what the description of the doppelganger in the novel is, but that might be a stretch. There's a few lines that are pulled directly out of the novel, such as Jessica's infamous,
"I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way."
There might be a few others, but not many. They used very little in terms of world building from the novel, For example, Toons in the film can only be killed by the use of dip. In the novel, Toons can be killed pretty easily. There is a heavy use of the idea of a Toon's word bubbles used in the novel, but that isn't relevant to the film as cartoons don't have word bubbles. When all was said and done, Who Framed Roger Rabbit cost $50 million to make. It would go on to gross over $350 million. It holds amazing ratings across the board on all major rating websites and from most critics. It is the only film in history to see cartoon characters from both Disney and Warner Brothers share the screen at the same time. The iconic Bugs and Mickey scene where Eddie is falling is a rare sight, and this is the only movie you'll ever see that in. The film was smart in many ways when it came to the unique plot devices they created. A small dialogue exchange tells us that Toons are immortal and really could never be killed until Doom comes along with dip. What is the dip?
Remember how we always thought there wasn't a way to kill a Toon? Well, Doom found a way. Turpentine, acetone, benzene. He calls it the dip.
So now, what do all these do? Acetone is used in many cleaning products to remove stains, such as permanent marker. Benzene is often found in paint thinner, and turpentine is used to remove heavy-duty paint. This combination is used to kill cartoon characters. Seems like a minor detail, but it just shows the effort put into the writing to turn this story into something special. The writing team was made up of Jeffrey Price and Peter Seaman. Not well known at this point in their careers, but their careers continued on as they also helped write 2000's live-action How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and they were part of the team that wrote Shrek the Third. But they were also part of the team that wrote Wild Wild West in 1999. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who right before this film would be known for the massive success of Back to the Future. He went on to direct the 2 sequels to Back to the Future, as well as a lot of other great films over the next 30 years. Despite the excellent writing and having a solid director, it was not easy to get the film up and running. Remember, Disney bought the film rights in '81, and the film didn't come out until 1989. Granted, animation takes a while, but what some may not know is that it did start production as early as 1982. Bryson Seaman was still on board for the script writing, but Zemeckis had offered to direct and was denied, as the 2 films he did prior to Back to the Future were not successful. By '83, they had casted Peter Renaday in the role of Eddie Valiant, who had some credits but nothing noteworthy. Russie Taylor was cast to voice Jessica Rabbit, but she was also an unknown. And the voice of Roger Rabbit was then casted to Paul Reubens, famous for his character persona, Pee Wee Herman. This was right after his HBO special, but before his first big film, Pee Wee's Big Adventure. There's no reason as to why production halted after '83, but when Michael Eisner took over Disney in '85, he wanted the entire film revamped. It was originally meant to be produced under Amblin Entertainment, but then moved to Touchstone Pictures. It would get Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy on board as executive producers, while Frank Marshall joined as a producer. It is because of Spielberg that we got all of these characters in the film. He convinced all of the studios to lend the likeness of these characters for short scenes, and they all agreed as long as the characters would not be depicted in any sort of negative light. For example, that scene with Donald and Daffy Duck as dueling pianists shows them on equal level. One is not better than the other. There were a lot of characters they tried to get that they could not get the rights to, like Tom and Jerry, Casper, and Popeye. Reubens had left the production, and the voice of Roger Rabbit would then be portrayed by Charles Fleischer, who also did the voice of Benny the Cab.
Ah, that's better. I can't believe they locked me up for driving on a sidewalk.
Come on, Eddie, get in!
It was just a couple of miles.
By this time, Zemeckis had a box office hit with Back to the Future, so he was then offered the director role, but only after it had been turned down by Terry Gilliam, famous at that point for directing Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Brazil. Gilliam found the project to be too difficult, but he later admitted that it was pure laziness on his part, and it was a decision he has come to regret. Now, Spielberg also had a few ideas as who he wanted to play Eddie Valiant. The list of possible actors was long. In order of consideration, Spielberg wanted Harrison Ford, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, Robin Williams, Robert Redford, Jack Nicholson, Sylvester Stallone, Edward James Olmos, Wallace Shawn, Ed Harris, and Charles Grodin. Eventually, they chose Bob Hoskins because they felt he fit more into the film noir idea that the film was going for. They went through a similar decision process for the role of Judge Doom. Tim Curry auditioned for the role, but they thought he was too scary. John Cleese expressed interest in the role, but he wasn't scary enough. Christopher Lee was offered the role, but he turned it down. Before Christopher Lloyd would get the role, they also considered Peter O'Toole, F. Murray Abraham, Roddy McDowall, Eddie Deason, and even Sting. Kathleen Turner went on to voice Jessica Rabbit, though she went uncredited for some time. Most of the voice actors for the original tunes used in the film were reprised by their original voice actor. Like at the end of the film, where we get the signature Porky Pig sign-off.
Move along. There's nothing else to see. That's all, folks. I like the sound of that. That's all, folks.
That's voiced by legendary voice actor Mel Blanc, who did all of his characters for the film too. After being released to universal praise, Who Framed Roger Rabbit would get nominated for 7 Academy Awards, where it won 4, including Best Visual Effects. It would also win this category in the British Academy Film Awards. Zemeckis would win several different awards as director. The film is noted as being one of the pivotal movies responsible for the Disney Renaissance. After all of this success, Spielberg was interested in a sequel, and he would then get J.J. Abrams on board to write the script. He presented an initial concept, but it got dropped.
Last chance, if you want to tell us what the Roger Rabbit sequel pitch was like.
No kidding.
I mean, this is
Or maybe that's, by the way, that's maybe the next thing.
Yeah. So just two lines from the pitch.
I don't remember.
Okay.
I swear to God, it was so long ago. I don't remember. But it never really got past the early stages of What If. But just to talk to Steven about it at all was ridiculously exciting.
Well, maybe that's a thing. Anyway,
it was then turned into a prequel idea where Roger joins the army to fight Nazis. This is bizarre, so listen to the description of what this sequel was supposed to be. It began with Roger Rabbit in his earlier years living on a farm in the Midwest with his human friend, Richie Davenport. Roger decides he wants to travel west to find his mother. In that process, he meets Jessica Krupnik, who is a struggling Hollywood actress that would soon be his future wife. Roger and Richie then enlist into the army, and they discover that Jessica has been kidnapped and forced to make pro-Nazi broadcasts. Roger decides that him and Richie must band together to save her by going into Nazi-occupied Europe and teaming up with several other Toons to form a platoon. After their victory, they are given a grand parade where Roger is finally reunited with his mother and father, Bugs Bunny. The film was going to be called Roger Rabbit and the Toon Platoon. Spielberg left the film after this idea came about, and you can't blame him. I just love the fact that they were trying to make Bugs Bunny both the mother and the father of Roger Rabbit. The idea of the sequel sat until 1997 when they attempted another revival. Rewriting the script was a big part of that. Test footage was shot in '98 using CGI, but the results were not good. They tried it one more time and that attempt was also bad, leading Eisner to cancel the film but there were also some budget constraints around that choice. In 2007, Frank Marshall stated he was open to the idea of getting a sequel going again. Then in 2009, Zemeckis showed interest in the idea as well. Price and Seaman had already begun writing a new script. By 2010, Bob Hoskins agreed to reprise his role for the potential sequel. Zemeckis wanted to return to the 2D hand-drawn characters with the live-action mix, the same formula that worked in the first one. The rumor mill basically all pointed to a sequel being in the works. However, in 2012, Hoskins would retire from acting after being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He unfortunately passed away in 2014 from pneumonia. Zemeckis confirmed that the script was given to Disney for final approval. But just before that, in 2013, Gary Wolfe proposed the idea of a buddy comedy to Disney that would star Roger Rabbit teaming up with Mickey Mouse. This film would be a prequel as well, taking place 5 years before the events of the first film, and would focus on how Roger met Jessica. The final script Zemeckis would pitch is an actual sequel, set several years after the events of the first film. It was supposed to follow Roger and Jessica into the 50s, essentially abandoning the film noir the first film depicted. Zemeckis also stated that they were going to digitally add the ghost of Bob Hoskins as Eddie Valiant for the story. Both men would soon learn that Disney had moved on from Roger Rabbit, and the film climate they were pushing for wanted nothing to do with a scandalous character like Jessica Rabbit anymore. There might have been other reasons to deny Wolfe's script, however. In 2001, he brought a lawsuit against Disney, stating that they apparently owed him $7 million from gross profits and merchandising sales. Disney, of course, denied the claim and actually countersued Wolfe, stating he owed them something around $1 million due to an accounting error. Eventually, after losing in 2002, his case was reopened in 2004, where he would win by 2005, but received nowhere near his initial ask in damages. This might not have been a good look to try and pitch a sequel 8 years later. As of 2018, Zemeckis still believes his sequel script is wonderful and hopes they might see it for that one day. Despite a movie sequel not being in sight, there are 2 novel sequels that Wolfe has written. Who Plugged Roger Rabbit, released in '91, and Who Whacked Roger Rabbit, released in 2013. More recently, a novel titled Jessica Rabbit: Serious Business was published in 2022, a standalone story where Jessica becomes a secret agent. Now, with all of this being said, it should also be pointed out that the film had some controversial moments that would follow it through the 90s. The film was released on Laserdisc, which isn't a prominent media device these days, but back then, it gave consumers the ability to skip through a scene frame by frame. With this, someone had discovered a scene in the original film release that shows Jessica Rabbit's dress lift up slightly and show her not wearing any underwear. The animators had got a lot of heat for that, and it has since been edited out in all releases moving forward. At the time, this little rumor did cause the Laserdisc version to be completely sold out in most stores. Another editing mishap that followed the film involves a line delivered by Donald Duck during the dueling pianist scene. The line is supposed to be,
I've worked with a lot of wisecrackers, but you are despicable.
which would lead into his signature frustrated quacking shout. But the way the line is delivered in that Donald Duck voice, some viewers say they hear it delivered as,
I've worked with a lot of wisecrackers, but you are despicable.
Which I will say right now, I hear doggone stubborn right off the bat. But this is one of those things where if you focus on the word while you are listening, it can go either way. I don't want to assume this is real, but it gets a lot of heat for that. Despite all of this though, the film is still the type that stands the test of time. It's a film that can be enjoyed by every generation, and any age group. It's one of those rare films that you don't need to question it or think too hard, but it's smart enough to be witty and feel just as much as a comedy as it does a murder mystery. There is just this over-the-top history behind it all that when brought to the light, it can almost feel like you're talking about a completely different movie. Everything about the story Disney changed, to the troubled production, to the failed sequels. This film has a hidden road it was taken on, filled with lost chances and bizarre events. It has a history rich with intriguing details that it becomes hard to turn the stone back over once it is face up. Maybe we'll never see a sequel, but maybe we don't need one. Maybe this can be one of those films that's left alone, to be a single shining entity. An example of how sometimes a movie we least expect can leave a substantial mark in film history.
Now Roger is his name. Laughter is his cane. Come on, you dope, untie his rope and watch him go insane.